Hello and welcome to the next talk in the Creators Bootcamp. And I'm really excited to welcome today Vasilena Valchanova, founder at valchanova.me. And we're going to be talking about newsletters today, and specifically how we can build our newsletters so that we can grow our tribe and establish our personal brand. We all have a newsletter of sorts, probably. How large and how effective they are, that's the thing that really counts. And so I, for one, particularly interested to see and learn from Vasilena to really understand how we can maximize the opportunity in front of us. So in this talk, we're going to be covering growing your list, engaging new subscribers, keeping people engaged, and tracking performance. So it sounds like nicely tactical. So if buckle in, and get ready. This should be a good note-taking talk, I suspect. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started and before I hand over. I've mentioned at the beginning, there's a chat window here. There's also a Q&A section as well. We need some questions from you. So when we come to the end and we have the Q&A section, it'll be great if there's some questions in there already. I will keep an eye on the chat window. So if you have anything that you want to ask whilst Vasilena is talking, I may interrupt her as politely as I can if there's anything pertinent. If not, we'll just hold it until the end. And as I say, you've got two areas where you can add that, both in the Q&A section or straight in the chat. I'll keep an eye on both. There will be a replay for this as well. So if you have to duck out halfway through, keep an eye out on the emails that will come through the platform later on, and there'll be a link to watch the replay. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, sit down. I hope you enjoy. And I'm going to hand over to Vasilena.
Awesome. Thanks, Benjamin. And again, such a great pleasure to be here and to be speaking to all of you guys. And I'm really happy that there's more and more events happening specifically for creators, because I'm one of you guys. I started off my journey as a content creator. I had my blog talking about different topics in marketing, content marketing, digital marketing, and copywriting. And it wasn't until 2019 when I actually started finding different ways to monetize the audience I've built up to this point. And actually, my newsletter has been the greatest resource for that. And today, what I'm going to share with you are some insights into what makes a good newsletter, how you can build one that gets opened and gets read, and a newsletter that inspires action. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll get this show on the road, Cool. So we're talking about newsletters, and what we are aiming for is this right here, that big smile when someone receives your email. Our inboxes are a precious space that gets inundated by all sorts of promotional offers, spam, emails from loved ones, emails from coworkers, emails from that one coworker where, your adrenaline immediately shoots up when you see even the name in the front field, like we've all been there. But the idea here is how you can stand out in this hugely populated space that's usually reserved for people that your receiver knows and trusts. So essentially, by building a successful newsletter, you're getting into this select group of few of the people that your audience knows and trusts. And that's super important for establishing a personal brand of any sort and for growing a tribe. I'm talking about tribes here because I don't necessarily like the word community, and it isn't necessarily applicable to what I'm talking about here today. There are some talks in the program that will be talking about community building specifically, but what I mean by tribe is that group of people who follow you, who are interested in what you have to say, and who want to know more from you. So let's see how to do that and how to get there. First, a quick intro from me. Benjamin was a true sport and managed to pronounce my full name rather stellarly. But Vasilena is what my mom uses when I'm in trouble, and everyone else calls me Vasi. So when you're asking questions or when you drop me a line later on, you can just use Vasi and that will be great. I've been in digital marketing for more than 15 years now, and all throughout that time, I've been creating my own content as well. So I'm sort of on both sides of this river at the same time. I'm a marketer by trade and I'm a content creator as well. So I think what I'll have to share with you would be very applicable to both people who are looking to build up their own creator profile and also people who want to use the newsletter as a branding tool for their business. You can see here all my contacts, and if you want to talk about this or anything else that you think I might be of service to you, I'll be stoked to do that and continue that conversation later on. And on my website, volchanova.me, you'll find some of my musings on different topics in content marketing, copywriting, brand messaging, and more. So newsletters are sort of a unique medium to me. They're one of the best channels that can give you a number of different opportunities. And they're frankly the only channel that does all of these things that I'm about to tell you in the most successful and efficient way possible. So the first thing that a newsletter can help you do is nurture a connection. Obviously, with newsletters, you'll be in people's inboxes, their most private digital spaces, save for their search history, I guess. And you'll be in there almost like either every week, every 2 weeks, depending on your posting schedule. And this is where the big opportunity lies. You'll be able to foster that connection, to keep getting closer to your target audience, and to tell them whatever it is that you want to tell them on a more regular basis. And this can immediately grow into creating a tribe of followers, a tribe of those 1,000 true fans, as Kelly usually says, that you need to succeed in whatever you do. A newsletter isn't a space of the many. You won't be seeing like 200,000 reach or something like that, as we see on a social media platform like LinkedIn or Facebook. But you will be talking to the few people that really matter. And this is one of the best things about newsletters. The people who sign up to receive information from you are highly engaged. And this is sort of the group that's warmest to any offer you might have to share, be it a course you've just created, like I have just recently, be it a book you've published, be it a partnership with a brand you're working with, or whatever it may be. One great opportunity with newsletters is that you have enough space in a newsletter to show off your personality. And this can be conveyed in many different ways. Everything starting from the layout of your newsletters and the way you sort of structure your content, all the way to the language you use and the words you use. So with a newsletter, you have the attention of the person. There isn't any distracting elements. They don't see the next post which contains like a kitten of a friend, or they don't see the next piece of LinkedIn broetry that's so damn popular now. You know, you have their attention in full, and you can also create longer form content in a newsletter that can really show who you truly are. And going further down the list, this is a place where you can truly bring great value to your audience. And those of you who may have heard me speak before, you will know that value is the one thing that I deem highest in the hierarchy of any content marketing goals you can have. If you're giving your audience the value that you create and the value that they will need to succeed, this is where you can really become their favorite person in the world. You can be the one person that they trust, the one person that they want to do business with, the one person whose recommendations they're gonna directly follow. And talking about this, talking about recommendations and so on, a newsletter will also help you establish your thought leadership, establish yourself as the knowledgeable person in the room. If you get someone to sign up to receive information from you in their inbox, this is the best sign that they value your opinion. And sure, you can build thought leadership on LinkedIn, you can build thought leadership on YouTube, but there's something about newsletters that's much more personal and much more direct. And this is why thought leadership built through a newsletter can go a much longer way compared to other channels or other methods you can use. And finally, and I really can't stress this enough, a newsletter is a unique space in the sense that your audience is yours. You can get your list from platform A to platform B. You can move those people directly without losing a single subscriber in this process. You can review all of the information of your subscribers, the information that they've obviously decided to give you and they've consented to give you. And this is what makes a newsletter, frankly, to me, the best medium out there. Because if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on Instagram, if you're on YouTube, you're essentially building your house on rented land. We can't really know what's going to happen tomorrow. Maybe, there's a big tech billionaire who has their eye on one of the platforms you're currently using, and in 6 months' time, it will be completely unrecognizable with new rules, with new ways of reaching the audience, and even with a bunch of your audience just completely off that platform. You probably all know what I'm getting at, right? So with a newsletter, you're not dependent on someone else's whim, and you're not dependent on the changes of an algorithm. You have your audience, you have access to that audience no matter what. Sure, there are things that can change, and they do change. For example, when Gmail introduced the promotions tab, obviously that created huge stress on newsletter creators because we were going in a completely different place compared to like the main regular inbox. And this is going to have an effect, but it's not as disruptive as, Facebook dwindling your organic reach to less than 2%. If my memory serves me right, that's the latest benchmarks I've seen. So, with the newsletter, you have these people, well, not in the palm of your hand, because that sounds somewhat condescending, but you have access to them, you have their contact information, and you can get in touch with them. So I wanted to make sure I get through this before I dive into the actual advice, so that we actually are completely sure that the newsletter is the right place to invest time and effort in. But okay, we are now sure that a newsletter is the right format. How do we build one? I want to focus on 3 specific areas. The first is building value. How do you create value for your subscribers with a newsletter? How do you present your personality in the best way possible? And how do you build long-lasting relationships? So rather than just focusing on growing your list and getting those people subscribed, how do you make sure that they continue to, read your information, to continue to engage with you on a regular basis? So I want to start from the most important place, and that's the value. how can you create value for that audience? Well, there's a lot of different ways, and every newsletter is different, and it can bring different types of value to your audience. If I have to simplify it to the basics, there are 3 different types of content you can create your newsletter around. The first one is if you're already creating a lot of personal content, you can use the newsletter to provide that information to your audience and to give them access to the newest pieces that you've published. This example here, this is Siege Media. They're a big marketing agency focusing on content marketing specifically. And most of their newsletter is focused on promoting the content that they're publishing on other platforms, their YouTube videos, their podcast, and so on. This can have some value, provided that your audience doesn't necessarily want to, go to your website to consume that new information, and they need a handy reminder to check out the latest info. It's also a way of creating value if you're publishing quite frequently on a regular basis. So another example that comes to mind is Ahrefs, the SEO tool. They have a great newsletter because they publish something like 5 or 10-ish articles every week, and their newsletter features the top 3 from that week. So it sort of serves as a filter of sorts. It gives you the most important pieces right in your inbox. But frankly, this isn't a great way of building a newsletter. It's all focused and centered around your own content, and it's not bringing much new information to the table. It's essentially serving as, a post-it note saying, hey, there's new stuff here, come check it out. So I much rather prefer the other 2 examples I'm going to share with you and the other 2 approaches to newsletter building. The first is curating other people's information. And the best example of that is Morning Brew or Marketing Brew. And all of the Brew branded newsletters, they are essentially your personalized filter of information. The value that they create comes from the fact that you really don't need much else, just their newsletter, to stay on top of the latest information in your industry. And frankly, Marketing Brew is the one thing that I usually start my day with. And that's essentially what they wanted to create. I know that once I go through their newsletter, I'm going to know all there is to know of the latest things that have happened throughout the previous day or the previous 2 days, actually, in the field of marketing. And one way we can actually build on top of this is to add sort of like a personal opinion, because some of their links, some of the links that they include in the newsletters are actually very, very short and very like a telegraph form description of what's inside the piece, but there isn't much context on them. So you can build on top of that idea with more context, more insights, and so on. And the third format when it comes to newsletter is what I like to call news posts. And this doesn't mean that you're covering the news. It's sort of a mashup of newsletter and blog posts. So essentially, this is a take where you can build up your whole newsletter as sort of a blog post that comes to your subscribers' inbox. A great example is Good TikTok Creative. Their newsletter is essentially like one example from a brand that's doing TikTok marketing right. And they have a long overview of the concept, of the reasons why it will work or why it didn't work as well as it could have. So when you open that, you'll be looking at something like at least 3 or 4 minutes read time in the newsletter. And it brings a ton of additional value because it doesn't just give you like a link or a quick example. It actually goes deep into the founders of that newsletters their own thoughts about this campaign. So no matter which of these approaches you take, you need to make sure that you're doing a couple of things right. First, you need to deliver clear and indisputable value. You need to give people some information that they didn't know before. You need to give them an example they haven't seen before. You need to give them some form of motivation or some form of inspiration or any other emotional type of value that you can create. You would want to share your own point of view, and don't be just sitting in the corner there and just regurgitating other people's opinion. Have a point of view and get this point of view across. This is what subscribers actually want to see. And then finally, what you can also do is to give them a behind the scenes look. The newsletter is a great place where you can get all personal about the way you're creating content, about the struggles you've been dealing with. And I don't mean that in the sense of, going on like a daytime TV show or anything like that. It doesn't need to be like, all weepy or whatever. It can be just a quick insight into, for example, if you're a YouTube creator, hey, here's a behind the scenes look of what we're currently working on. We were on a shoot at this place. You'll soon see what we did at this venue in our next video. This is a very basic example, but it also gives you an idea of how you can build up that personal relationship and nurture that connection with these subscribers. So unless you have at least 2 of these things in the mix, then your newsletter can be substantially improved. So try to figure out what's the value that your subscribers will be looking for from you. What's your point of view, and don't be afraid to share that. And what can you give them as additional insights to bring them in your inner circle? Subscribers are a part of your tribe, so treat them like this. Treat them like people who are, in that circle of trust that you have created, and they're gonna, in exchange, give you more of their time and more of their attention. To focus on the value itself, you need a good value proposition. And frankly, this is sort of the biggest hurdle I'd usually see when I see someone's newsletter. Like, what is it really about? Like, why should I give you my email address? Why should I give you access to my inbox? Well, building a cool and succinct value proposition is gonna open those doors for you. So here's an example of Carney, which is a marketing agency, and they have the newsletter called the Daily Carnage. And they promise you that you'll be the sharpest marketer in the room if you follow them, if you read their content. Having something succinct like that gives people a reason why they should trust you. So the first step is to promise them something. This is what I promise my audience. I read 180 articles per week, so you don't have to, because I'll sift through all this information and bring you the 5 or 6 best links that I've come across in this week's research. And I'll give you, the short list, the greatest highlights, the greatest hits. And this is how you keep up as a marketer, and you won't have to spend more time than you need to. But on top of promising, you also need to prove. So how can we prove the value of the newsletter? One of my all-time favorite tactics is to have a landing page for the newsletter where you can also add some testimonials. So this is what you see here. This is my newsletter's landing page, and I have a few lines where people say what they value about the newsletter. Every newsletter from you is filled with value, and this one inspired me to no end. This is what I want people to see, and I want them to understand, okay, there are other people who already trust this lady that I've never seen before, so I can actually follow her and I can learn from her newsletters. The other way of proving that you see here is just links to previous editions. If they can see in advance what you've done so far, they might be that much more likely to focus and to give you their email. Another tactic that I would usually use is to include on that landing page a perfect for you if section. This is a short list of bullet points where your ideal subscriber can recognize themselves. So this is an example from another brand that I worked with to create their newsletter landing page. And they are a consultancy that helps brands create purpose-driven campaigns and purpose-driven business. So obviously you see here, you want to bring more purpose into your daily work and life. You're a change maker at heart. These don't need to be more specific than that. They can be just a way to give people an idea, like a signpost, if you will, of, hey, like if you recognize yourself in these lines, then you'll be interested in that newsletter that I have to share with you. The second thing I mentioned was personality. And obviously, there's two parts to the word newsletter, as Anne Handley, a great content marketer, loves to say. And she says a lot of people focus on the news part of the word. I think we should focus on the letter. Don't forget that you're creating a newsletter. You're writing directly to another human being who's sitting there and giving you the time of day in their busy schedule to learn from you and to hear what you have to say. And this is a very powerful thing. So in your newsletter, it's not just about creating value. It's about showcasing who you truly are and giving people a bit of a personalized experience. So one thing that I really like with newsletters is when the newsletter creator has a signature element. This is a great newsletter, and I'm going to share it once I finish sharing my screen in the chat, because I'm afraid I'm going to butcher the name of the person who creates this. He's called Yanis, and he's the founder of Visualize Value. So he creates these amazing visuals that sort of very succinctly explain a different idea. And in his newsletter, you always see this sentence at the start. Today's issue covers this many ideas in this much time. His value proposition is to teach you how to present ideas visually and how to get better at presenting ideas visually. So this is why it's important for him to say, hey, I can convey this idea in as little time as possible. Maybe for you, it will be a different thing. I personally always end with a PS where I'm asking my audience a question, and that's my signature thing. I always have a weekly cat in my newsletter, and my newsletter is about marketing, so that's not directly connected, but you can see like how that creates additional personality and adds a personal twist to it. And one of the best ways to create this personal touch is to include sort of an editorial section at the start of your newsletter. Here, I took a screenshot of a very short version of that, but usually I have an editorial that's sort of 4 or 5 paragraphs of text talking about something related to marketing or to professional development. And these are topics I know my audience deeply cares about. And this is where I'm adding the letter part. And this is what I'm starting the newsletter with. All the links, all the campaigns, all of the links to my own personal content, they come after. I want people to have this experience of first talking to me directly and then seeing more information. And when it comes to personality, there's this great idea of brand archetypes. And these are archetypes that are part of psychology as a science, but they're nowadays used by marketers a lot. I'm just giving you an insight here, and I'll also give you at the end of the talk a link where you can learn more about brand archetypes if you haven't heard about this concept before. But essentially, it's about figuring out what you want to sound like and who you want to be. But there's an even simpler version of that. You can see here that there's a total of 12 brand archetypes that you can use, and you can create your personal tone of voice around. But there's an even simpler way of looking at it, and it's what I call the movie special. So think about a character in a book, in a movie, in anything really, who represents who you want to be or how you want to sound like. So no matter if you're an Elle Woods or if you're a John McClane, this will be your own style. So depending on what you want to present as your own personality and who your audience is and what's going to resonate with them, you can think about your own voice in the sense of it's close to this character, but different in these and these ways. So I'm not saying here, be a carbon copy of your favorite movie character, nothing like that at all. I'm saying use this as a sort of an exercise or a sort of, a language that you can get behind and that you can employ when you're thinking about the sound, that the voice that you want to employ. How does your content sound like? Does it sound like you? Is essentially what I'm trying to say. And this might be sort of like a side thing for most people. Like, okay, content does come first for sure, but how you present that content and how you present that information is also important. Anne Handley, who I mentioned before, she has this saying of, will people know it was you if the brand tag came off? So if you look at your own content, so if we come here, if there is no logo on top, if there is no visual, will people know if they've been reading the newsletter for a while? When they receive this, will they know, oh, this is Vasi, this is her newsletter? Even though I don't see any brand elements in it, I can recognize the voice. And creating that is gonna build up the consistency of your content. And it's also gonna create more liking, because people essentially like things that are familiar to them. So the more familiar you can sound and look in the long run, week after week or month after month with your newsletter, the better your audience is going to react. And the third thing I mentioned at the start was building relationships. And the value proposition that I talked about earlier, that's a way for you to get new subscribers through the door. But the work doesn't stop there. You need to build this relationship as an ongoing thing, as an ongoing exercise. And you can only do that by getting people through the door, obviously, but then doing the work to get their attention and keep them engaged. So we can think about 3 separate areas that we want to, pay attention to. The first is the initial retention. So onboarding a new user. What you want to do is from the get-go, from the first email they receive in their inbox, you want to give them a reason to read. You want to give them a reason to pay attention to your content, and you want to tell them why they should at all. And this is usually the domain of some form of a welcome series that new newsletter subscribers get at the start of their journey. For me, this is a series of 4 or 5 emails that first introduce them to who I am, what I'm talking about, how often they're going to be receiving emails, and so on. So the basics and the practicalities of it. And then I also give them some of my best content so that I can put my best foot forward, and I can show them, yeah, this is a person that has a lot of value to give me, so I'm gonna read her every newsletter. The second stage is creating that short-term retention. So within the first few weeks or the first few months, depending on your newsletter's cadence, you want to establish a pattern of usage. You want to make sure that you're giving them the right content at the right time to get them to read more and continue engaging with your newsletters. In my experience, if people read the first 2 or 3 editions of your newsletter, then the likelihood of them continuing to be an engaged subscriber in the long run is going to be that much higher, because they've already, they have this habit, they have established that pattern of usage, and they will continue to read on. How can you do that? Well, one of the things you can do is, send them your newsletter, but also send them some additional information. For example, there are a couple of editions of your newsletter that you've seen people really liked and engaged with in the past. Then send them a link to those. Tell them, hey, like if you want to catch up on older editions of the newsletter, here are a few that are sort of, our greatest hits. And then finally, you want to think about long-term retention. So making your content indispensable in the long run. And this isn't really more complicated than, just paying attention to the quality of the information you're putting out there and being consistent. These are the 2 main predictors of success in a newsletter: the quality of the information and the cadence. And if you start off with your newsletter and you really want to think about how often am I going to send this, and start off with the very clear understanding that you need to commit. If you're going to be sending that newsletter every week, then it needs to go like clockwork. Maybe you're going to be late one day. Maybe you're going to send it on a Friday rather than a Thursday. That's less of an issue than skipping a week or a few weeks if you've said, I'm going to be doing a weekly newsletter. And this is where long-term retention actually happens. If people know why they should pay attention and they know when to expect you, more often than not, they're going to be looking for your insights. So I want to quickly give you an example of onboarding, because I think that's the most sort of the place where there's very low-hanging fruit, and you can pick these and you can work with them. And in an onboarding series, it's about both talking and listening. So in an onboarding email, you want to tell people what is happening here, who you are, why they should pay attention, what makes you different compared to others, and everything that really matters at this stage, how often they're going to be receiving emails from you, what you usually talk about, and so on. Then you want to also give them reasons to pay attention. Showcase the different components of your newsletter, give them some of links to your best content, show them your accreditation, so what other people have said about your newsletter, or maybe even just social proof in terms of this many people have already subscribed. But even more importantly, use this as a time to get to know people. And here I'm talking about asking direct questions in the emails or sending them a survey that they can fill in, so that you can start learning gradually more and more about the people who subscribe to your content. And obviously, this will help you build better content. Here's an example of the first email people receive when they sign up to my own newsletter. And there's this question: what was going on in your life that led you to subscribe to my newsletter today? Obviously, not all of my new subscribers take the time to reply. And maybe I would get something like 15 or 20 replies a month, which isn't really a lot. But the people who reply, they give me great insights into what's important to my subscribers, what are they hoping to achieve, and how I can be of better service to them. And when we're talking about the long run, we are gonna usually hear people talk about open rates and click rates, but there's more to building a relationship. You wanna look for the signals that showcase that people have found value in your content and they're eager to share it with others, or that something has resonated on a personal level. So what I look at is replies. How often do people reply to my newsletters? And again, it's going to be just a few people who can take the time, or who are willing to take the time to reply. But the more replies you get in the long run, the more you're going to learn what resonates with people and what additional ideas or concepts come to mind. So I know very well which of my editorial letters in my newsletter have actually, felt more personal, or that felt more interesting to my audience based on the replies I get. You can also track how many people forward your newsletter to others. And I definitely suggest you include a line in your newsletter saying something like, if this email was forwarded to you, you can get a subscription here, and then lead them to the landing page for your newsletter. Thinking that only existing subscribers are reading your content is gonna, make it harder for new people to sign up. You can also look at people sharing information from your newsletter on social media. Sometimes I get tagged on LinkedIn by people who've seen one interesting article in my newsletter, who are now sharing it with their LinkedIn audience and saying, hey, I found this thanks to Vasi's newsletter. And I would usually, take the time to say, glad you found this helpful, and then potentially engage in a conversation with that person, so others can see that I'm a real gal with a real face, and they can subscribe and they can, get the newsletter for themselves. And then there can be additional personal feedback. So for example, at events, I'd quite often meet people and, they're going to say something like, hey, like I've been following your newsletter, which is an amazing thing. So, keep this in mind. All of this is sort of anecdotal evidence. You can't really, look at the numbers for all of these, but there are signals that you're doing something right. So I want to end this with this favorite phrase as well. The proper definition of a human is an animal that writes newsletters. This is how I would change that now. Writing something personal to someone else is a very human act. And that's sort of the more philosophical reason why I think we need to focus on newsletters as well. You have ideas, you have thoughts, you have feelings, you have a desire to connect with others. And that's what a newsletter is really. You can get to others in a much more direct way. And I hope that with this presentation, I've given you some ideas on how to do that. To sort of wrap this up on my end before we move to questions, if you want to get my newsletter, you can go to volchanova.me/newsletter. We can also share that in the chat in a sec. And one other thing that I wanted to remind you about, if you're here today, then you're actually eligible to get a discount on my online course on content marketing and brand messaging. I talk about newsletters there as well, but today I've shared with you the most important information from that particular chapter in the course. But there's more than 70 other videos in there talking about different concepts around content marketing, copywriting, and brand messaging. So we have currently activated a discount code that's going to give you €50 off by May 31st. And if you want to see more about this, you can just go to volchanova.me/course. So by ending with my signature weekly cat, this is where I want to open this up for questions and see what you guys want to discuss next.
Fantastic. Or you leave it right to the end to proclaim that you're a cat fan. I'm a dog person. So oh well, we'll just have to learn to get. We'll have to learn to get on. But whilst you've been talking, there've been a load of questions come through, which is fantastic. So thank you everyone for posting the questions. I just hope that we have time. We've got, I think, 15 minutes to go. So let's stop talking and go straight into the first one. So Michael's asking, how similar are your newsletters and blog posts?
The short answer is they're completely different. In my newsletter, I'm actually experimenting with a more personal tone, and I'm talking about like currently topical things. Like, for example, a few weeks back, it was about ChatGPT and about AI and my personal thoughts around like how we're going to deal with that as marketers. In my blog, I focus on more evergreen content. So that's sort of the distinction I get there. And I obviously share my blog posts as sort of like links in my newsletter as well, which is a great distribution channel for that.
Yeah, and I suppose it's giving yourself permission to have them be distinct channels in their own right. But also just recognizing that, yeah, there will be some overlap. And obviously, a newsletter is a perfect place to be mentioning your blog posts, but it can also be its own unique channel in its own right in terms of content. Okay, Michael's also asking, which day of the week do you feel is the best day to send this out? Depends, I guess, but there's probably a couple of rules there, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, so I always, when I get that question, I really like to give an example with a brand I used to work with, and they were targeting moms of toddlers and babies. And in this case, we were working with them on social media content, but it sort of applies to that same idea of timing. So with them, our strongest engagement time was 10 p.m. at night, because that's when the partner's potentially home and they can take care of the kid, or the kid's already asleep, God willing, you know, and they have some time for themselves. So depending on your audience, that's going to be different. As a rule of thumb, if you're talking to, you know, regular Joes in offices like me, or regular Janes, I guess, I would focus on starting off on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, either early in the morning or sometime in the early afternoon, when people are already know they need a coffee and they need some nice reading with their coffee. And this is where I'd start with, but definitely experiment with that and see what works.
Cool. And then actually related to that, Paul's asking, how frequently do you recommend we create our newsletter? So not just timing, but frequency.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, one of the things that's most important with newsletters is consistency. So if you have any doubts that you're going to be able to keep up with a weekly send out schedule, I'd suggest then doing every second week. This is frequent enough to stay top of mind, but you know, it's going to still give you some breathing space where you have time to prepare that next edition. Any less than that, like monthly, is like sort of a last resort. If it's between like sending it monthly or not sending it at all, then for sure. But this is already like once a month. That only gives you 12 editions per year to test something new and learn from the audience, because every new edition is also a learning opportunity. And that's not really enough.
Cool. And then Daniel's asking for any tips re-engaging with a list that hasn't been emailed in around 6 months or so. And he's asking specifically, what would be the first 2 to 3 messages or steps to try to limit the unsubscribes and get re-engaging? So can you save a stale list, I suppose, and reduce that unsubscription?
I'd say in line with what I was talking about, the behind the scenes sort of idea, my like favorite way of going about this would be to be very frank and open about it and tell people, hey, like we've sort of fallen off the bandwagon here, but we want to, you know, continue to bring value to you. Maybe I would remind them in the first few editions of what this is all about, what's the newsletter about, what they can learn from it. And I would try to give them in the first few emails some cool special offer for subscribers so that they can see that there's more coming down the line, that they get some additional value of being a subscriber. And one thing that I didn't really talk about here was list hygiene. So no matter if you have a stale list or you're just like on a regular sending schedule, every 6 months, I'd say it's a good idea to send a few emails to the people who haven't really engaged, like opened or clicked any of your newsletters in the past 3 to 6 months. And if they don't interact at all with these few re-engagement emails, just completely remove them from the list. It's better to have a smaller engaged list that's, if they are not like opening or engaging with your content, then this is a vanity metric really about you, and it's about ego rather than what works.
And of course, that saves you money as well, because you're paying, no matter what the platform is, almost certainly you're paying for subscribers.
Yes, yes. And it's also helping your deliverability, because if an ESP, an email service provider, sees that you're sending a big number of emails to their users and no one is engaging with that, then there's a bigger chance that you're going to get moved to a promotions tab or a spam folder even.
Good tips there. So we have an anonymous one here asking the all-important question, I suppose, that everyone starting out will want to ask, and there's probably no firm, solid answer to it, but let's see how you go. How do you get started when you have 0 subscribers?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I'm going to try to leverage the network that I already have to get people on the list. So be it your followers on LinkedIn, be it people who you're in contact with on other social media platforms, or even like personal contacts. If you have a strong business connections that you've only been, reaching out to by email, then once you launch your newsletter, send them an email and tell them, hey, like we are starting this thing. We think you are going to enjoy this. So feel free to subscribe over here. But obviously never get people on your list who haven't explicitly opted in. That's a big no-no.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, how long have we got? We've got 8 minutes. I'm going to try and storm through a few more here. Yeah, I guess related to this, Andy's asking, are there any tips on building subscriber numbers other than social media? Looks like we've probably, it's how do you go out there and actually build that list in the first place? Looks like we've touched on some of those, but if you have any extra comments, feel free to.
Yes. So the one thing that I can sort of build on top of what I already mentioned is using other people's network. So for example, if you have friends who are catering to that same audience, maybe you can get them to lend a hand and mention to their subscribers that you have this new newsletter you're creating, and maybe you can figure out like what you can give them so that it's like a proper value exchange. Or even if you include in your newsletter a link from a partner organization, go ahead and tell them, say, hey, like we really like this piece you guys created. We shared it in our newsletter. By the way, if you think that this is something that your audience is going to be interested in, feel free to, recommend that to them,
Yeah, most of the time building community, or building, not community the wrong word, but building your following and just getting the word out there more generally, it's often the common sense sort of things. You need to tell people about it, let people know, reach out and give people the opportunity to actually share it, etc. So something a bit more topical, I guess, from a tech sort of standpoint. So Stephanie is saying, I love the human behind the letter, but what are your thoughts on AI platforms to enhance newsletters or newsletter content, I guess, if we are not great writers? So I guess 2-part question, like, do you feel it's important, or to what extent will it hold you back if you are not, or at least you perceive yourself not to be a great writer? And irrespective of how good or bad you are at writing, can AI be a good path to go down just to enrich it with content?
So I'm gonna sort of answer sort of allegorically. I don't perceive myself as a good runner, but I just finished a half marathon in less than 2 hours a month ago, which is like my best accomplishment to date, and I'm all very happy with it. And the the way this happened was through practice. As long as you try your hand and your pen, or your word processor or whatever at writing, you're gonna get better at it. When it comes to AI, I think they can be a great way for you to start, but one of the things that AI lacks is personality. So you need to be very specific, either when it comes to, using AI as a first draft is great, but then you need to change that up and add your personal voice to it. Or some tools out there, they allow you, or even like if you're using ChatGPT directly, you can tell it, write this in this type of voice. So make sure that this sounds like you, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and investing in your personal brand, and that includes voice and everything else, and style and just emotion, and will always pay dividends, I think, into the future. So it's tempting, isn't it, to sort of take the shortcut. I personally use AI quite frequently, but often always just as an idea generator, giving me that sort of initial draft with a view to then editing it later on. So, but I think it's important that folk use the tools to use that to enhance their strengths or weaknesses as you see fit. Do you use this is Michelle is asking, do you use other people's content in your newsletter? And if so, what are the pros and cons?
I do. So the way my newsletter is structured, I first have this editorial letter that I mentioned at the start. Then I have probably like a focus piece of content that's related to my own work. So a blog post that I've written, or even like last week, I shared that I'll be speaking at this event today. So news from me personally. And then I have 5 or 6 links from other people's content. And I see all pros with this approach, no cons at all, because this, first off, makes sure that you have more content in your newsletter, so more reasons for people to engage. And also from the point of view of a customer, you're saving them time. If you're recommending pieces that have already gone through your personal filter, then they don't need to worry about that. I mentioned this is my value proposition. I read 180 pieces a week, so you don't have to. And this is where these additional links and other people's content comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can try and be a little bit too precious sometimes, can't we, with our own content? But actually, fundamentally, we should be focused on delivering value for our audience. And quite often, the most sensible way of doing that is to share the love and to actually bring in outside content. So yeah, definitely don't be afraid of sharing other people's content. This might be the last question. We'll see how this one goes. So this is from Jason, and he is doing or planning to publish a podcast or have a podcast. And he's just curious in terms of what would your cadence be to combine the podcast publishing, I guess, with a newsletter? Would you do a summary of a weekly podcast and a catch-all newsletter? Maybe combine it. I guess he's sort of suggesting if he's publishing maybe a podcast a week, and there might be an email that goes out about that. Does it make sense to have one email that goes out specifically talking about the podcast and then another weekly newsletter on a separate day, or maybe combine them together? Does it matter in your opinion?
I'd say that it really depends on the relationship with the audience that's been created so far. So for me, sending out a newsletter that it essentially says, hey guys, there's new content from me out there, go check it out. That's the sort of the baseline value that you can give, but there's a lot more than that. So my personal preference would be to include the mention of the podcast in a more general newsletter that also brings in some other pieces of content or some other form of value. For example, just what I mentioned with my personal newsletter, there's always front and center at the start, there's a piece from me. And this is also serving my needs as a creator to get people to my content and to get them, engaging with more of what I'm doing. And then the rest of the content is about creating value. I really love this idea from Gary Vaynerchuk, who has this book called Jab, 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 Right Hook, which essentially means give people 3 times more than what you're actually asking from them. and asking someone to dedicate time to listen to your podcast. Of course, that podcast is ideally, I'm pretty sure, bringing in additional value, but it's still an ask. And you need to give more in order to justify that exchange. So this is sort of all the odd reasons why I would start off with including the podcast in the newsletter. If you have like a very large list who's really engage with the content, then you can go and separate these two. For example, Tim Ferriss does that. He has one newsletter that goes out every week with the latest podcast episode, and his 5 Bullet Friday, which is sort of a great thing that people sort of engage with and can play around with and get additional links from.
Yeah, makes sense. And a good reminder just to keep things simple initially, or when in doubt, keep things simple. You can always branch out and separate them later on and get clever and experiment with things. Well, look, thank you so much. That has been an incredible hour, jam-packed. I think you'll agree with some really, really great tips and advice there. There doesn't seem to be much you don't know about newsletters. So, and equally, there are many more questions, I think, from people that have posted them during this session. And I'm sorry we haven't had time to get to them all. But there is a comments section on the talk page, and we'll both get a ping when a comment gets posted there. So please do go over there if you have another question or just a follow-up question, engage with us over there. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. The replay should go up in a couple of hours, depending on processing times, that sort of thing. We have the next talk going live in about 15 minutes. So if you're able to join us for that one, we'd love to see you over there. The next one is Scaling for Success, how hiring employees can help you grow your business and boost your profit. So we're going to switch a little bit, a bit more internal, operational focused, but again, jam-packed with value. Thank you so much, Vasilena, for taking some time out of your day and speaking with us today. Really, really great. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you too. It was a pleasure. And thanks to everyone who watched live and everyone who's watching the replay, because that's also where the magic happens. So see you guys. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks.